I met Daniel at college, and from the start, he was calm, composed, the kind of man who carried himself without needing to prove anything. I, on the other hand, had a flair for attention, a tendency to push boundaries with my humor. We clicked instantly, and after 3 years of dating, we decided to get married. The wedding was perfect, or so I thought, until that fateful night. It was the reception, loud music, champagne flowing, and friends caught up in the celebration. I had a little too much wine and a little too much courage. I leaned toward him during the speeches, jokingly whispering about a sensitive topic, his size. The laughter around us felt like validation, a shared amusement at his expense. I didn't expect the weight of my words to land the way they did, or that Daniel would react in the calmest, most shocking way imaginable. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He didn't blush or fumble. He simply removed his ring, placed it on the table, and walked away. Silence fell for a moment, sharp and tense, as if the room itself had paused. People glanced at me, some with concern, some with curiosity, but I couldn't move. I watched him leave, composed, deliberate. That single act, the removal of the wedding ring, spoke louder than any words ever could. After he stepped outside, I followed, trying to understand what had just happened. He was leaning against the side of the building, looking at the night sky, not upset, not angry, just distant. "Daniel, I was joking," I said, my voice a mixture of nervousness and guilt. He didn't turn to face me immediately. His silence was heavy, almost unbearable. Then he spoke low and calm. "Do you know what this means?" I shook my head. He explained that trust isn't about jokes, and intimacy isn't about comfort. It's about respect. A simple remark, he said, could reveal how little someone values the other, even in front of friends. I wanted to argue, to laugh it off, but there was a firmness in his tone that stopped me. Daniel had always been steady, but this moment revealed a side of him I had never seen. It was not anger, it was clarity, precision, and boundary setting. I stayed silent, realizing the weight of my actions. Around us, people resumed talking, laughing, and clinking glasses, but my world had shifted. Daniel didn't shout, didn't storm off. He showed me, with a single gesture, how quickly respect could be lost, and how easily someone could lose their position in your life. The wedding, which had been a celebration of love and connection, had suddenly become a mirror, reflecting the fragile balance between humor and harm, intimacy and embarrassment. By the time the speeches ended, Daniel was gone. I didn't know if he had left entirely or was just somewhere quiet thinking. I felt a mix of panic and curiosity. How would he respond next? Would he forgive me immediately, or would this become a lesson I couldn't erase? I had crossed a line, but the path forward was unclear. Daniel returned after some time, quiet but composed. He didn't rush into an argument or dramatic confrontation. Instead, he asked me to walk with him outside, away from the noise, away from everyone else. The night air was cool, and the city lights flickered around us. I tried to apologize, stammering through words I knew were too little, too late. He stopped and turned to face me. "Do you understand why I removed the ring?" he asked calmly. I nodded, trying to convey that I did, but my mind was racing. He continued, "It's not about embarrassment. It's about respect. And when respect is broken, even jokingly, it's hard to rebuild immediately." His words were measured, but they cut through the haze of my intoxicated bravado. I had laughed, thinking it was harmless, not realizing the depth of his feelings or the standards he held in his heart. Over the next few hours, I followed him, letting him set the pace. He didn't ignore me, but he didn't let me off the hook either. Conversations were minimal, polite, careful. Every word I spoke was deliberate. I realized that this was his way of teaching without confrontation, letting me feel the weight of my actions without raising his voice. By the end of the night, he hadn't shouted, hadn't demanded an apology, but the impact of his gesture lingered. The next morning, he sent me a simple text. "Meet me at the park at noon." I arrived heart-pounding, unsure if he had decided to leave me or to talk things through. When I saw him sitting on the bench, calm, arms crossed, I knew this was the moment that would define us. He didn't smile, didn't show anger, just looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Yesterday," he began, "wasn't just about a joke. It was about understanding boundaries. If you can't respect me when we're surrounded by people who don't matter in our relationship, how can I trust you in moments that actually count?" His tone was calm but firm, each word deliberate, as if chiseling the truth into my mind. I swallowed hard, realizing he was right. I had underestimated him, my humor had crossed a line, and now the consequences were tangible. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't embarrassed me in return. Instead, he had acted with precision, letting my actions speak louder than words. I felt both guilt and admiration. He continued, explaining how trust isn't just given. It's maintained in small acts, in consistency, in knowing where the boundaries lie and choosing to respect them. I listened, nodding, understanding that this wasn't just a lesson for that night. It was a framework for our marriage, for how we treated each other in private and public, for how humor and intimacy should coexist without harm. By the time we left the park, the air between us had shifted. There was no dramatic apology, no tearful confession. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a recognition of boundaries, and a subtle respect for the power of actions over words. Daniel hadn't lost his composure, and I hadn't lost his trust completely, but I knew it would take time to rebuild fully. Over the next few days, our interactions shifted. I stopped making impulsive jokes, and he didn't need to remind me of boundaries verbally. His quiet consistency had made the point clear. Respect is earned and maintained, not assumed. Even during casual conversations, he remained composed, observing my words, my tone, my body language. It was a silent test, and I felt the weight of every moment. At the next family gathering, I noticed the difference most. I laughed when appropriate, but I avoided teasing him in ways that could embarrass or undermine him. Daniel stayed confident, calm, but closer than before. Not distant, not cold, just measured. The tension from the wedding night hadn't vanished entirely, but it had transformed into something else. A mutual understanding of limits and intentions. I realized how much power lies in restraint, how actions can teach lessons far more effectively than words ever could. A week later, we had a private moment at home. I tried to apologize again, not for the joke itself, but for not understanding the impact it could have. Daniel listened, then placed his hand gently over mine. "You don't need to keep apologizing," he said softly. "I know you didn't intend harm, but you need to remember this: humor is powerful. It can heal, but it can also hurt. You crossed the line, and now you know where it is." His calm voice carried more authority than any shout, more impact than any angry outburst could. The weeks that followed were a subtle dance of rebuilding trust. I became more observant of his reactions, his moods, and his boundaries. I learned to measure my humor, to check before I spoke, to prioritize respect over laughter. In turn, Daniel remained patient but firm, showing me that true strength lies in measured actions and unwavering standards. One evening, while we were setting the table for dinner, I felt a shift. He reached for my hand, not because I asked, not because I needed reassurance, but because he chose to. The warmth of his grip, the deliberate tenderness, spoke volumes. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy. It was deliberate, quiet, and powerful. It was the reward of patience, the proof that respect and understanding can rebuild what carelessness almost destroyed. I realized something important. The wedding incident wasn't just a lesson about sensitivity or embarrassment. It was about boundaries, trust, and communication. Humor, intimacy, and love exist in delicate balance. Cross the line carelessly, and even the strongest bond can fracture. Respect it, and the connection grows stronger, deeper, more resilient. Months later, when friends laughed and teased again, I smiled, knowing the lesson was learned. Daniel remained unshaken, confident in who he was, and I had grown too. I never made the same mistake again. That night at the wedding could have been the end, but it became the beginning. A start to understanding the power of actions, the quiet strength in restraint, and the depth of respect that underpins every strong relationship. We were stronger for it, more aware and more careful. Not because we feared conflict, but because we understood that love, trust, and respect are earned daily, through action, observation, and choice. And in that understanding, our bond had never been more secure.